2022's The Batman is one of my favorite movies just based on how it looks, and so today I want to walk you through how I recreated the aesthetic of The Batman and how you can too. So I know there's probably going to be a lot of you that clicked on this video just because you want to see a tutorial of how to apply the effects and the color grading and everything to make your footage look like the Batman. So if that's all you came to watch, and that is perfectly fine, just skip to this time code on screen right now. But if you want to stick around and watch me break down how I recreated the lighting and the cinematography of the Batman to kind of recreate the overall aesthetic, then just keep watching. So I love Batman, and it's fair to say that I completely adored this movie. And as a gaffer and aspiring cinematographer, I really take inspiration from other movies, movies that I really enjoy, and I like to try to recreate the shots or try to recreate the look of that to help improve my filmmaking. So I used all of the equipment that I could in recreating these shots, and I feel like, you can always put filters and stuff on your footage, and you can always do different coloring to your footage, but if you really want to sell the effect and you really want to try and recreate that aesthetic, you have to use all of your tools to emulate how they shot their footage. At the end of this video, I will show you what it looks like just applying all of these effects as filters, basically, on some footage that I shot a long time ago. But I think if you really want to get that whole effect, it's really important to shoot in the style of the movie and to shoot with all of these aesthetics and all of these things in mind. So this first shot that I'm going to be breaking down is easily my favorite shot in this entire video, and I think it's the shot that I'm probably the most proud of in all of these videos that I've been shooting. The reason why it's my favorite, I think, is because I knew that there were these three key things that I had to incorporate in this when starting to shoot. I really wanted to recreate, the rain and the wetness of, that sounds so weird, but the shimmer that water and that rain gives, because in Gotham and in the Batman, it's raining constantly. The really kind of dark, low-key lighting of it all was a huge thing for me to sell this. And then the colors, because obviously the Batman loves red. Red is the color for the entire movie. So I knew with having that blue and red cop light flashing in the background, it was going to give me that texture and just kind of ground it more in the world of the Batman. But I mean, it was a straightforward shot to shoot. I'm just standing in the tub, actually getting myself wet, because initially I wanted it to be raining in the shot. As you can see, that did not work at all. Oh my goodness. But I mean, other than those challenges with water, really all it came down to was just getting, a dim key light on the front of my face so that you could see something, and then having that cop light flashing in the background just to give it a little more visual texture. So these other shots that I did at the doorway were really inspired by how yellow and grimy all of the light is in film. This one shot of the penguin was really what inspired me for this shot, and just seeing how, the light is very top down, but it's also soft. I didn't want my light to be super harsh, because in the film there's hardly ever really sharp shadows on things. It's usually fairly diffused. So in order to sell that effect, you can see that I bounced the light off of the ceiling so that, it wasn't pointing directly at me, but it was still filling that space and coming from above. Now, in order to get the actual warmth of the light, I actually slapped something that I mentioned in a previous video, an orange binder divider onto the front of the light to act as a gel. Now, yes, I may have just been able to correct it from, the cool 5600 Kelvin that the light actually is to a nice warmer yellow color in post. But if you can do it in camera, then you might as well do it. And so this is what I'm telling you, be resourceful with your filmmaking. If you got binder dividers laying around, use them. because they work. So that shot was to really give kind of the contrast of what the film is all about, because yes, you've got your dark, gritty shots, but then the rest of the time, whenever you're in these residential areas in the film, it's always this, you know, this soft, it's really saturated yellow. And then we have this fridge shot, which was the idea that made me want to shoot this video. I'm so fascinated by shots where, you know, the camera is in the fridge or it's in a cupboard or anywhere where the camera is shooting from a perspective that the human eye never sees. And so those shots just always fascinated me, and I thought it'd be a really cool idea to use the red that's a signature for this movie in this example. So obviously for the red key light of this shot, I stuck my little Ulanzi light panel just at the very back of the fridge, but I wanted to still separate my body from the background a bit and keep continuity of where we kind of were in the scene. And so I kept that yellowy light in the background, but this time instead of bouncing it, I wanted it to be more harsh so that it could really define me from the background. And so I just hiked it up and pointed it directly at the back of my head. I decided to place the two objects in front of the camera a bit just to kind of give it a little bit more separation, you know, give it layers, a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. And I also really liked how the light shimmers off of the side of that water bottle. Then of course we have our last example of just the complete sea of red. So I took inspiration from this shot of Commissioner Gordon, and it is completely flooded with red. There are two colors in that shot, red and black. And so with this one, I really kind of tried to emulate that. I had my red light coming from as high up as I could possibly have it. You know, you've got the really hot spot on the forehead and then the fall off as it goes down the face, like in my reference shot. The framing of this one was a little obscure, but I also noticed that in the Batman, they like to do a lot of low angles and a lot of really high angles. And so, you know, this was kind of a nod to that. So now that I've kind of broke down my approach to how I lit these and how, you know, my brain worked when thinking of recreating the Batman, I want to take you into the post-production side of things, which is where your shots really go from something that's kind of inspired by the Batman to something that looks like it could take place in that world. So here we are in Premiere, which is what I edited this in. I just want to say right off the bat, you can do these effects in any editing software. Maybe not Windows Movie Maker. It would actually probably be easier to do this in DaVinci Resolve because that's a node-based editing software. And so node-based programs would have a much easier time doing this, but I'll show you how to do it in Premiere. So, you know, the first thing that you want to do with any footage whatsoever is you want to balance it. If you're shooting in a log format, which means that, you know, you just shoot with the maximum dynamic range available, you're going to want to correct it back to its original look. So, you know, boosting your contrast, boosting your saturation, anything you have to do to make it look like how it looked in camera. But in my case, I just did a basic, you know, color balance where I brought up the exposure a little bit. I definitely brought up the contrast. And then I, of course, did the classic cinematic split where you take your color temperature and you put it more onto the warm side, and you take your skin tones and you put them more to the green side, and it gives you that kind of grungy cinematic look. But after you've completed a basic balance of your footage, you're going to want to do what's called a bleach bypass. And so a bleach bypass is traditionally done to actual film, and it's a chemical procedure done to boost your contrast without boosting your saturation, because in nature, when you boost the contrast of your footage, it's also going to bring out the, you know, those colors and boost that saturation. But because we're not shooting on film here, I want to show you how to do that in Premiere completely free, no plugins. So to start this effect, we're going to need to duplicate our footage. So you're going to click on your first layer of footage, you're going to hold Alt and drag it up to duplicate it. And then on that second layer of footage, you're going to want to take your saturation slider and slide it all the way down to 0 so that you get a black and white image. Now basically from here you can do little tweaks of, you know, brightening it, giving it more contrast, maybe playing with your highlights and shadows. But once you have finished all of that, what you're going to do is you're going to go over to your blending mode and you're going to put it on either overlay, soft light, or hard light. They all have slightly different effects, but I found for the footage that I shot, soft light was the best one. So then once you put your footage on soft light, you can tell that the contrast is really heightened but the saturation levels stay the exact same. If your footage is too dark after that, which is a very common thing, you can just bump your exposure up a little bit and play with all of your settings until you get the desired look. So once you have done all of that and it brings you to this point and you're happy with that, what you're gonna wanna do next is nest your footage. Now, if you're doing this in a node-based software, you do not have to do this, but because I'm doing this in Premiere and it's a layer-based software, we have to nest our clips into one, which is basically just merging them. So once you've nested both your clips together, which can be done simply by just selecting both clips, right-clicking, and going up to the nest option, you're gonna wanna duplicate that clip again on top of itself. So then once you have these two clips, what we're gonna do is we're gonna give our footage a little bit of a filmic glow almost. So one thing that digital shooting does as opposed to shooting on film is it gives you really harsh lines and sharpness around everything. Now, obviously you want your footage to be in focus and you want it to be sharp, but when shooting on film, it gives it a really nice fall off between the highlights and the shadows of your footage. So we're gonna imitate that with digital footage. So once you've duplicated your footage, what you're gonna do is go up to effects and look up the effect Luma key. You're gonna take Luma key, plop it onto that second clip, and then go over to your effects menu. So to see what you're actually doing on the second clip, you can hide the bottom layer and it'll show you just the top layer, and that is terrifyingly dark. So in order to fix this whole thing, you can play with your threshold and cutoff in order to get it in that sweet spot. The goal of using this effect is just to highlight the main highlights of your image, because in film, you know, not everything is going to have a radiating glow. It's just going to be those highlights in your footage. So once you've gotten somewhere comfortable with the Luma key effect, you're going to want to go back over to your effects menu and you're going to want to look up Gaussian blur. Is it Gaussian or Gaussian? Grab that one and slide that onto your top footage as well. Now down in your blur, I found that 50 is a nice level, but you can play with more or less. So then once we apply that and we go back down and unhide our bottom footage, wow, that is sparkly. So obviously that is just too much of an effect. So you want to come up to the opacity of your top clip, and I found that I usually put it down to 5%. Or maybe a little more, you know, you could put it at 10, and you can see that just around the eyes and around the top of my forehead there, that, you know, it has a little bit more of a glow as opposed to before. That also kind of helps to bring up the blacks in our footage and just to kind of give it a little bit more of that softness that film usually has. So in terms of the effect, the hard part is basically done. Everything from now is just adding adjustment layers and adding little tweaks to it. So the next thing that you can see in the Batman footage is that they have a really nice separation between the colors of their shadows and the colors of their highlights. A really, really popular separation, and I'm sure you've seen it in countless movie posters, is cyan and orange or yellow. I mean, it kind of depends. Those two colors are opposite on the color wheel, and they give a really nice contrast, which a lot of films use, including this one. Our highlights and stuff are already quite orange because, you know, we tinted our footage more to the warm side. So what we want to do now is bring down the shadows to that kind of teal cyan level. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new adjustment layer. Now, over in the Lumetri color page, we can go down to creative and you can see these two wheels that give you your shadow tint and your highlight tint. Now, if you think that your footage needs a little more of the orange range in your highlights, feel free to slide that one over to the orange area. But for our footage here, I'm just gonna grab that shadow tint and I'm just gonna bring it down to the more cyan level. And now you can see when we toggle this track on and off, how it definitely makes a difference. So next you want to slide another adjustment layer right on top of there. And this effect, you know, it may seem kind of like cheating, but you got to use all the tools that you have. And Premiere has some really nice, you know, filmic LUTs in their software, so we might as well use them. So in order to find all of these creative looks, when you go under the creative tab in Lumetri Color, you can toggle this look menu, and there are tons, and I mean tons, of different LUTs basically that Adobe has made and put in here. There are bleach bypass looks. So if you don't want to do the whole bleach bypass thing, you can just put a LUT on there and it might look similar. I don't know. But the one that I found gives, the vibe of the Batman and gives your footage a little bit more of a filmic taste is this Kodak 5218 Kodak 2383 by Adobe. Now, this look at 100% would be way too overwhelming. And so what I did is I went down to the intensity and just put it down to 45. So with this next adjustment layer that we add on top, we're going to be adding a little bit of distortion. You can see in many shots in the Batman, the edges of the frame are distorted and almost looks like it's like blurred. So they used anamorphic lenses when shooting this. Anamorphic lenses, what they do is they will shoot in a compressed format, and then you have to stretch the footage out afterwards to get that really nice cinematic widescreen look. So when stretching that, it takes some of those highlights and some of that bokeh, those unfocused parts, and it stretches them to almost give it like a radial kind of effect. So in order to replicate that in Premiere, it's really simple. I mean, it doesn't look the exact same, but it gives it that same kind of feel. So what you're gonna do is go up into effects, grab your directional blur, plop that onto your new adjustment layer, and then come down to the directional blur settings. So once you find your ideal blur length, and I put mine at 90 degrees so that it's going horizontally as opposed to vertically, because I felt like that looked a little better. I put my blur length at 7 because, we don't want it to be like intense to the point where you cannot discern what is happening. You just want to add a little bit of that effect to it. So now, as you can tell, this is blurring our entire footage, and we do not want to blur our whole footage. So we want that effect to just be, kind of around the edges of our frame. So what we can do is we can create a mask over this. So if you grab your circular mask tool and then you just kind of stretch it out to the corners of your frame, you can see that it's giving us like the opposite effect that we want. So what you can do is you can go down, invert this mask so that it just affects the outside, and just feather that out so that eventually you get a nice fall off around the edge of the frame, and it gives you a little bit of that distorted look. And now with the second last effect of our footage, we're gonna put a little vignette around the frame. I know that there is, in the Lumetri color page, an actual vignette option, but it crashes my computer every time I try to use it. So I decided that I was gonna create my own vignette. So what I did to do that is I just created a new color matte, and I did the exact same thing that we did before with our directional blur, where I inverted a mask. But as you can see, that still really looks like crap. So in order to help that, we can go again to our blending mode and put it to soft light, and then just decrease our opacity until it's a nice level. I found that usually at about 17, it still gives that look, but it's very discreet. And then finally, the very last effect that we'll be doing to our footage is the classic film grain. Film grain can be amazing to your footage, and it can also make your footage look like total crap. So when using film grain, I just caution you, really, use it sparingly. Use it when it only serves a purpose. Don't just put it onto any footage to kind of make it look aesthetic. It doesn't work. I've tried it. I've got a film grain video that I found somewhere on the internet, but I'll link it in the description of this video for you guys to download if you'd like to use this version. So when importing this grain onto your footage, we're gonna go over to our blending mode, and we're gonna put it this time on hard light. Now, there are many different settings that you can use for grain. Oftentimes people use overlay, or you can use things like screen, but with our footage right now, screen does not look good, obviously. I found that with our footage, hard light was the one that worked best, but again, play around with those blending modes and see what's gonna work best for your footage. If you absolutely adore grain and you wanna just smother your footage with grain, then be my guest and throw it up at 100%. But for me, I chose 20%, and then we have our final shot. So you can see the difference of how our shot looked at the very beginning as opposed to how it looks now with all of these effects put on it and with this really, the time and care put into it. I know I'm not a master colorist, and I know I'm not a master editor, and there are definitely things that I have done wrong here, things that could be done in many different ways, but I think this sells really well. and everything is completely free. So if you want to see the full edit of all of this footage that I shot and created my, little The Batman trailer, go over to the TikTok that is listed on screen. And if you want to see what all of these effects look like on footage that I didn't shoot for this video, go check that out on the TikTok as well. There will be 2 videos there regarding this, and I will be in the future posting a bunch of exclusive stuff on there that I won't be posting on YouTube, so it's good to know where you can find that stuff. Thank you guys so much for sticking around for this video. I know this may have been a bit of a long one, but I really hope that I was able to inform you on how you can get the really beautiful aesthetic of the Batman on your footage, and I hope that I can inspire you to go out and replicate some of your favorite movies footage and just play around and see what you can accomplish. If you enjoyed this and you want to see more stuff like this in the future, put that in the comment section below. If you have other movies that you want me to recreate the aesthetic of and you want to know how to as well, drop that in the comments too. I'll be reading all of them and I'm going to get to them as best as I can. Don't forget to subscribe and stick with me through this entire journey of helping you and helping me become better filmmakers, and I'll see you guys in the next video.